Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Taylor. This is the Microsoft Launch Program. We're celebrating National Entrepreneur Week, presented by Microsoft. Also, check out hashtag MSFT Launch if you want to follow what we've been doing. Scott Duffy, the author of Launch the Book. And you've been bringing some great people here to the show today. I'm so glad to be a part of this. I'm learning a lot. I hope that you at home or wherever you might be are learning also. That's what it's all about. These stories are very inspirational. So far, so good. I've learned a lot this week.
Well, I'm so fired up about our next guest, Matt Theriault. And Matt and I go back. We're good friends. And one of the things that I love to talk to you about, Matt, to kick things off is you started in a big company, in a big industry, before kind of moving out of that life and shifting into entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there today, like they have a vision, they have an idea for a product or service they want to take to market, but they're afraid to take that first step.
So those are wantrepreneurs. They want to be an entrepreneur, but they're stuck maybe in a corporate job or in a dead-end job, and maybe you can help.
What advice could you give to them?
So when I got out of the Marine Corps, I did spend the next 15 years of my life in the music business and living my dream, pursuing the passion. Life came very easy. I would hardly even call it work. Did very well for myself, and then this thing called the digital download came along. You might have heard of it, yeah? And basically turned the whole music industry upside down.
Oh, yeah, I have some friends that were, devastated.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and every music store went out of business, and, when you're in the business of selling CDs and your distribution channel shut down, it's really tough to stay in business.
What did you call those things? CDs?
Oh, yeah. Compact discs. Compact discs, right? And that led very quickly to in about 6 months, I went from a 7-figure year to $7 an hour bagging groceries.
Wow.
I was bankrupt, I was divorced, and it was a really tough spot. And that next 6 months while I was bagging groceries was probably the world's biggest pity party ever. I was really hard on myself, blamed everybody. It was everybody's fault, wasn't mine. How could this happen to me? This is not fair. And there was one day where I wasn't bagging groceries. They were short a person. I got upgraded to checker that day, and I was really excited because I didn't have to do paper or plastic anymore.
Which is a thankless job, by the way.
It is.
Standing there.
Right?
Yeah.
And there was this soccer mom. I can see her face so clearly. Soccer mom comes through, and she's got her stroller, and she's got her 2 kids, and she's on the cell phone, and she's in her little tennis outfit, just got done exercising, and I told her total or whatever it was, and she barely acknowledged me, but she opens up her checkbook, and she hands me her card, and when she opened up her checkbook, the little ATM receipt fell out on the counter. And I couldn't help but sneak a peek.
Yeah.
And her balance in her checking account was $256,000.
Wow.
And that was a very significant amount for me. Well, it was really a kick in the stomach because that number was very significant to me in the sense when I was in the music business, that when my bank account hit that amount, that's when it triggered a transfer. And I was just thinking about how long it had been since I'd seen that amount in my bank account. And I was completely overwhelmed. I felt nauseous. I had to excuse myself from my position. I went out to my car, and I just put my head against the steering wheel, and I was crying, and I was just like, I'm better than this. How did I get here? No one's helping me. I'm waiting for a hand up. Like, it's just, life was hard, and I never experienced that before.
You needed a paradigm shift, and that was kind of happening in that moment.
Right. So I walked back in, and of all people, the grocery store manager, who we happened to be the exact same age, and he had noticed something was definitely wrong with me, and he put his arm around me and kind of told him just what I told you. And he said, come up to my office. And we went up to his office, and he said, Matt, if you want your money back, you got to do it in real estate. Real estate is the final frontier where the average person has a legitimate shot at creating real wealth.
Wow.
And I was just like, ding, ding, that's what I was waiting for. But another thing I realized at that point was, I'm here. This is what life is for me, unless I do something about it.
And you
no
were
one is
just
going to do it for me.
fresh out of the military at that point, or you had been out for a while?
Several years out, probably 10 years out by that time.
Okay, wow.
Working in a big industry, the music industry, and then and this happens to a lot of us, we're in a business and we're doing well, and something completely outside of our control knocks everything sideways. Yeah. And that's what happened to that industry.
And it happens all the time.
Yeah.
It does.
That night, I grabbed a bottle of wine from the shelf, and I went home, and it was just the wine, Google, and myself, and I just started tapping in everything real estate. And I came across a really interesting figure, I was on the Department of Health and Human Services website, and they had identified the 1% of the wealthy and how they got there. And 74% of that 1% got there either through business ownership or real estate. Either they made their money in real estate or they parked it there. And that was just like the confirming piece of what I'd experienced earlier that day. And, you know, luck have it. I don't know if you call it luck or chance or just a miracle, is that just one city over, an aunt I hadn't seen in 15 years had been the #1 real estate agent there for the last 27 years.
Wow.
And I had no idea she was even in the business. I fired her off an email. I said, "Can we have lunch?" Next day, she responded. We had lunch. It was a great time. And, you know, within 40 hours, I was in real estate agent school. And, you know, after 4 years of that, I realized, oops, if real estate is where all the money's at, it's not as a real estate agent. It's actually on the other side of the desk. So I made a shift to become a real estate investor and stumbled across this nice little book so many people have read, inspired so many people, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I really caught the concept of passive income. Yeah. And it really just made sense for me. So
I love this story, though, because you got this tiny little piece of advice from a guy at a grocery store that you were working for. And that little bit of advice changed your whole life. But it's so interesting how one tiny little thing can change the whole course of your life. And aren't you glad you listened? Aren't you glad you picked up that receipt in that moment?
Yeah.
To be able to hear what that man said.
And the listening is the key, because so many times, just as people, we go through times in our lives, you know, we all have ups and downs and highs and lows and all that stuff. Well, I've been in this place where I've been so hungry and I've been so passionate, and I just felt if I could get a break or somebody would lend me a hand, right, that I do awesome. And I think the fact that you were open enough to listen is, you know, that really says a lot.
Timing. Because it was all timing, wasn't it?
And most of the time we hear this stuff, and we're so stuck in kind of our pity party that it just doesn't sink in.
Right. The big paradigm shift was when I was in music, it was all about making as much money as I can. Like stack that money. Let's making piles of money. And this was a totally different way of going about life and creating wealth for yourself. Is not necessarily creating piles of income, but creating streams of income. You know, not
and
piles
what's the difference?
It's very different. I mean, I guess the piles of cash is more transactionally based. The stream of income is more of obviously a residual base type business model, and just a different way of, I guess, putting your money to work rather than you working for your money is the big difference there. So
your website, by the way, epicrealestate.com. I also know that you do a podcast. You're the #1 podcast on real estate on iTunes, which congratulations for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is your show about?
Our audience is pretty diverse. We have a lot of do-it-yourselfers. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to learn how to go out there and wheel and deal, get their hustle on. And then we have another sector of our audience is the busy professional, very much cliche, the doctor, the lawyer, the small business owner that has money, that wants real estate, just doesn't have the time, or maybe even doesn't even have the desire to go out and do it, but they understand that they need it. So that's a big part of our audience. Then we have other people that are just looking for alternative investment opportunities.
It's interesting. My daughter and her new husband, they're 23 years old. The pair of them are just on to buy their second house right now. They went and made an offer on a house, $205,000, I think they offered, and the bank turned them down. And the bank put the house up for auction, and it only brought $180,000. Of course, they were high bid. So they actually ended up buying it cheaper than what they offered. And I believe this is a great time to buy real estate. Interest rates are low. There's a lot of housing on the market that is available. But I think real estate's great.
I think it's always a good time to buy real estate if you buy it for the right reason. If you buy it for the income that it produces, it's always a good time. If you buy it for the equity or the potential appreciation, that's when you're gambling, and that's where it gets risky, and that's when you're subject to the market conditions.
That's a good point.
You know what I love is that you decided that you wanted to get into real estate, and then you studied what people who were really successful in that business were doing to model their results. And I think that there's really two ways to learn. We can learn through hard knocks, which is trial and error, which takes a lot of time and money, or we can find people, like I said, that are producing the exact result that it is we want to achieve, do the same things to produce the same results. And I believe that's what you teach today.
Indeed. And there's two options if you're going to pursue wealth. Is you can take the path of the minority of successful people and create your model to wealth, or you can take the path of the majority of successful people and imitate that model to wealth. Finding someone that's out there that's done what you've done and has done well at it, copying what they do. Just watch how they did what they did and go ahead and use that as your starting point. You can make modifications around the way to make it fit your specific situation, but that's really a fast track.
Yeah.
And Matt, did you have any mentors along the way?
Oh, many. We talked about Robert Kiyosaki. He's probably the first mentor in the.
But did you get to meet him or just?
Yeah,
through
I've had him on my show,
Okay.
and I've been able to meet with him in his office. And we talked for several hours. It was a great experience. It came full circle. That's definitely one. Scott Duffy's been a mentor of mine for sure. I don't know if I was supposed to say that here. but
No, it's great.
Scott has been, he's counsel for my business, and I bring him in once a year or so, and I say, hey, look at this. Something's broken over here. Come fix it. And I think once you hit a certain level, it might not be as empowering to look for individuals, but more to look for environments and groups of people. There's a couple pretty high-level mastermind groups that I belong to that I think, each year it's a little bit painful to write that check, but I look back and I've gotten so much out of that.
Yeah.
So I think being intentional about your environment, surrounding yourself with people that are actually doing what it is that you want to do and are doing it well, I think that's a bigger impact with the group of people than any one individual mentor.
When seeking out environments, what are one or two things we should be paying attention to?
There's two types of people out there. There's the talkers and there's the doers.
Yeah.
So I think the first place to start would be, at least find someone with common interests. And then just kind of keep your eye open for the people that are actually walking the walk. One of the pieces of advice I always give, and it's a great website called meetup.com. And, it's a place where you meet online, but then you meet offline. And so you can find people with common interests, and I think that's a good place, a starting point where you can find a group of local people that have a common interest. And then, you keep your eye open for the person that's really doing it.
I have a fun little story about Robert Kiyosaki when he was doing a Rich Dad, Poor Dad Minute. They brought me in to try and help him just do the best job he could. And we went in and he was sitting there reading his script, and it sounded like it was being read. And I think that folks that are even watching this will see this is just as real as it gets. There's no script, and we just are who we are. And so when I watched him read the script, I said, Robert, you know what? Aren't these your stories? Don't you know them? And he says, yeah. I said, don't read them. Just tell the story. And so he said, okay, I'll give it a try. And when he was done, he says, I feel liberated, Alan. I feel liberated. It's so funny. Because I thought to myself, who am I to help a guy like Robert Kiyosaki? But you know what? It's these little pieces of advice that you can learn from me or him, or maybe we can learn from you that help us move forward in our lives. I love that.
Let's talk about podcasting for a minute. So you are number one in your space for podcasting. And I know there's a lot of people out there that would love to have their own podcast and get started. Can you give us a couple of tips on how we can get started with our own podcast?
Yeah, speaking of advice.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. It's becoming a very popular medium. And you're getting people with major national platforms coming to the space now. They got their TV shows and their comedians with the household names. And so it's getting very crowded. So I think what's really important right now is if you decide that you're going to use a podcast or go make a podcast, you have to make a decision. The decision is, do I want to be a podcast celebrity or do I want to drive leads for my business? Because I think they're two very different approaches. And here's a perfect example, is I have the Epic Real Estate Investing podcast. It's going on our 7th year now. And that was it's a very general conversation. And inside of that podcast, it generates a couple leads a day for our turnkey operation. And so a lot of people were asking me this question, how do you start a podcast? What would you do first? And I said, if I was to start all over again, I think I'd get hyper niche specific with my title. I gave that advice out so many times, and I was like, well, I keep giving this advice out. Why don't I do it myself, right? So I started a second podcast called Turnkey Real Estate Investing. That podcast gets 10% of the downloads that the Epic podcast gets, but it generates 10 times the leads than the Epic podcast generates.
Right.
So I think that's a celebrity, or do you want to drive leads? So that's the two.
I think that people, when they begin to market, particularly younger entrepreneurs, they think that the best strategy is to cast the widest net possible and see how many fish you can bring in. But when you niche down, I think you can go farther, and really with a lot less capital than people ever imagine. There are riches and niches.
It's almost zero capital to start a podcast. It's pretty amazing what's available these days through technology.
Well, now it's your turn to check out Epic Real Estate Investing on iTunes. So, Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure.
Matt Theriault. I'm Alan Taylor. Scott Duffy and I will be back with more of the Microsoft Launch program.